So Ian reminded us of this timeline. And I remember Anthony calling me up 3 years ago to contribute a couple of chapters to this really exciting book. And at that point, it was an emerging approach of thinking about financing social change. And Anthony asked me to write about the social impact bond. At that time, we were 5 years into the journey of prototyping this entirely new model of thinking about bringing very different stakeholders together to address a common problem. And it's just been remarkable how much this tool has grown, standing here in 2018. I hope I don't need to really go into the social impact bonds right here in Massachusetts. I think many of you are familiar with the model, not least Massachusetts actually has 4 social impact bonds in action, which is actually the largest number of deals any state has undertaken, and also represents these 4 deals almost 20% of the social impact bond market in the United States, both in terms of number, 4 out of 22, as well as in terms of dollars mobilized, 40 million of over $200 million of capital mobilized. So it's a really appropriate place to be standing here at the Boston Fed to talk about the social impact bond and the tools that have spawned since. It also is remarkable to think about that these 4 deals were executed under 2 very different administrations, from the Patrick administration to the Baker administration. And it's also really exciting to think about the 4 deals covering a pretty wide span of issue areas. So in Massachusetts, there's a deal on juvenile justice, on homelessness, on upskilling immigrants and refugees in a workforce development deal. And then incredibly, the most exciting announcement, the 22nd deal in the country, is actually the deal that we launched a couple of months ago, focused on veterans with PTSD and helping them get back into employment. And speaking of birthing processes, it was actually a study that Bank of America Charitable Foundation, Carey, funded us to do 4 years ago that yielded that this particular issue area around vets was exciting. And then the VA during the Obama administration got interested. It carried into this VA administration. And then Massachusetts and New York City are the local partners implementing that project. So I think I polled a couple of people before I came in, and some of them may not have heard about how the social impact bond actually works. So I'll just spend a quick minute describing at a very high level how it works. So how does the social impact bond work at a high level? Government, investors, and nonprofits come together to define the social challenge that they want to achieve together, and how they'll know, importantly, that they'll know that they've achieved it. The investors play an important role because they provide the upfront capital to scale up the services of a nonprofit service provider. The provider then delivers services to the population, and if, as a result of this program, that the population experiences positive outcomes, results, then the government would then repay the investors according to a performance-based contract. And what if the project does not produce the agreed upon results, then the taxpayers are off the hook, and instead investors stand to lose some of their capital. So as you can imagine, the SIB transfers the risk of failure from government to the private investors, and also creates a very different incentive and dynamic with the service provider. Angela aptly characterized that as a nonprofit service provider, you depend on charity and government funding. And here, the nonprofit service provider, if they have a great track record of outcomes, they can access a very different kind of growth capital to scale their work, and that of the capital markets. So that's how a social impact bond works. And as I mentioned, since the first social impact bond launched by Social Finance UK, our sister organization, in Peterborough, UK, and not to overplay the birthing analogy, but Anthony Bug-Levine was actually instrumental in that birthing process when he was still at the Rockefeller Foundation, when our sister organization launched this first financing in Peterborough. So since then, a lot has happened.
Peterborough has wrapped up. It beat the recidivism benchmark set forth in the contract, and investors were made whole with a 3% per annum return. The field has also grown to a global kind of field, in the sense that there are now, in addition to the UK, the US, which are the leading markets for this new financing, there are now 120 social impact bonds in 27 countries. That's just an extraordinary statistic. I was recently in Delhi for a global steering group convening, and it somehow, the social impact bond continues to capture the imagination, whether it's a developed country context or a developing country context. Building the social impact bond field from scratch with many of our peers has been not only exciting and endlessly interesting. It's almost like sometimes you feel like you're playing a game of whack-a-mole, because you're building the airplane and flying at the same time, and new problems just constantly emerge. It's also been just one of the most humbling experiences. It's about as much as succeeding, it is about failing. It's about constantly learning by doing. And it's also constantly improving the program as we go on. And innovation and continuous improvement is very much part of the DNA at Social Finance. So what Ian and the team at the Fed told me to talk about was, you know, what's next after the social impact bond, and what is the set of strategies that we're thinking about pursuing in service of our communities in need. So what I'd like to talk about is a set of pay-for-success strategies that Social Finance has been embarking on over the last couple of years, in addition to the social impact bond. And I'd like to give 3 examples. One focused on the social impact bond. The second one focused on a new tool called the Outcomes Rate Card, which we also contributed a chapter in the book. And then the third one, perhaps you would be one of the first people to hear about this in a public forum, a new strategy that we recently launched called the Career Impact Bond. So I'll go into each of these 3 examples, but what I'd like to do is center these examples around one issue area, which is around workforce development. And it's only appropriate that we're here at the Fed thinking about all the growth and all the rebound that we've achieved as a nation after the Great Recession, and how we've created over 11 million jobs. But almost all of those jobs have gone to people with some college education, and that growth that we've experienced is clearly not broadly shared, and I don't need to be the one standing here to tell you that we've been in this continuous, steady, decades-long decline of economic mobility. So what I'd like to do is highlight 3 examples squarely in this set of twin challenges around declining economic mobility and the skills gap that our nation is trying to achieve. So the first one is the SID, and the reason I wanted to focus on a local SID is because we also have our partners from Jewish Vocational Service right here in the room. I know Amy Nishman is here, you're there, and our dear partner in Jerry Rubin, who's just, you guys have been amazing. So this project actually started during Deval Patrick's time. And for context, Massachusetts, you all know that this economy has been humming, and employers in the Commonwealth really depend on talents on the sideline to fill a lot of open positions. In particular, this economy has been very dependent on immigrants and refugees to fill certain positions. And so the Patrick administration started an RFP, now this is probably 4 years ago, to think about using Pay for Success to upskill and provide language training to immigrants and refugees. And through that RFP, we were lucky to partner with Jewish Vocational Service with, an 80-year track record of actually doing precisely that, providing English training and job training to immigrants and refugees. We raised $12.5 million from a wide array of investors, over 40 investing entities, institutional investors like Prudential Financial, foundations like the Kresge Foundation, all the way to individual investors, not least holders of donor-advised funds, people with accounts at the Boston Foundation, at Combined Jewish Philanthropies, and 2 other donor-advised fund platforms, All of these 40-plus investing entities provided $12.5 million so that JVS could provide their incredible services to another 2,000 immigrants and refugees. And this is how we call the deal a success. The success of the project is going to be based on three important outcomes. Whether these people get meaningful jobs like being a bank teller at a global financial institution, jobs like being a nursing assistant at a teaching hospital, whether these people get placed into jobs, whether these jobs actually provide the economic mobility that we want to see in these people. So not just stagnant wages, but actually wage gains over time. So economic mobility is one of the three metrics. And where appropriate, whether these people transition into higher education. So again, the success of the project is not based on outputs like how many of these people actually go to training, how many hours do they spend in training, but rather what happens to these people after they get the training from JVS. Are they going to land jobs? Are they going to keep their jobs? And are they going to have sustained wage improvement over time? So it's really exciting to think about this project, because since the launch of this project in the summer of 2017, we've already made 5 investor payments to our investors. And this particular project also, maybe in the Q&A we can get into this, represents the continuous learning that we've been able to experience as a field. So this particular project, they're actually a much more nuanced analysis when thinking about the cost-benefit analysis. So the original model was very much savings focused. Here, the way to think about the economic value generators is much more expansive and creative. So people getting into jobs and what that means for the economy, as well as thinking about how we think about evaluation and incorporating very active feedback loops as we manage for performance in the project. So this is the example about the social impact bond. Now, the career impact bond. Well, before I get into the career impact bond, let me talk about the outcomes rate card, which again is in the chapter. 2 minutes, okay, I'll be really fast. So an outcomes rate card is a tool that governments can use, and we now, when we wrote the chapter, it was simply an idea. Now we actually have 7 active outcomes rate card projects from Anchorage to Ohio. And in particular, we're working with the Austin, Texas Workforce Investment Board to think about how to use the outcomes rate card to prioritize the outcomes that they want to achieve for a vulnerable population. So together we'll be prioritizing outcomes like credential completion, job placement, wage gains over time, and then together we'll set prices for each of these outcomes that the WIB has prioritized. Actually $1 for each of these goals that we can achieve for particular populations. What's innovative about the outcomes rate card is that a government can then begin to provide incentives and move the whole system along and contract with multiple service provider versus one service provider, which is typically what happens in the social impact bond, and also be able to allow service providers to reach harder to reach populations and providing a broad range of incentives to achieve outcomes. Okay, Ian has given me 1 minute to tell you about the Career Impact Bond, which is an incredibly exciting innovation at social finance. So think of the Social Impact Bond as government paying for success. The Career Impact Bond is a new model to allow for students and learners to pay for their own career success. For context, as you know, there's 7 million unfilled job openings in America. Most of them are middle skills jobs. And while there are over 7 million people actively looking for jobs, how do we help reskill, upskill people on the sidelines who are looking for jobs, but yet these people just don't have either the financial wherewithal or the access to these programs to actually retool themselves to take advantage of the growth in the economy? So what we're doing with the Career Impact Bond is, instead of government being a player here, we are providing access for these really high quality training programs for low income Americans so that they can actually get retrained with no upfront cost burden to them. Now, what is the repayment mechanism? If the person is successful in securing a job over a particular income threshold, they begin to pay a fixed percentage of their salaries over a set period of time. There are protections both on the downside and the upside in the sense that if they don't meet the particular income threshold, they pay nothing. And the arrangement is also both capped in a dollar sense as well as a time sense. In a dollar sense is that every single one of these career impact bonds, people would max out on their payments, typically 1.5x to 2x of the tuition of the program. And it's also time capped in the sense that no matter how much they've paid into the system, they max out in a particular number of years, typically between 3 and 7 years. So we're launching a bunch of these career impact bond pilots in industries like coding, in the skills trade, in nursing, basically a bunch of in-demand jobs that the economy needs, yet a lot of people just don't have the savings or the space in their lives to get upskilled. So whether it's the SIB or the Career Impact Bond on the Outcomes Rate Card, I think all of them simply share a set of principles, which we all kind of brand under a set of pay for success strategies, this broader pay for success umbrella. One is that it's all about clearly articulating what outcome you want to achieve and having the hygiene to measure that progress toward that goal. The second is around collaboration across sectors. You know, how do you involve the private sector? How do you involve the social sector and the public sector? And then the final principle is that every dollar, every resource is tied to outcomes. So every funding dollar that gets released is inextricably tied to an outcome being achieved in any of these arrangements. And but I would be remiss not to mention that, you know, despite all these exciting tools and the expanding toolkit within the Pay for Success outcome-based strategy umbrella, these are simply tools, and these are simply means to an end. And the end is really achieving measurable and sustainable results for our communities.